Hello and welcome to the home of the Ghost Owl as we continue our look at the possible lords and heroes that could be added into Total Warhammer 3. Roadmap has been released, lords and heroes are coming for a number of factions. Harry the Hammer has been released as a legendary hero for the Warriors of Chaos. And now we're going to look at the vampire counts. We've done all the factions so far in alphabetical order. And we've now reached the vampire counts, which is going to be a long one. So, as with all the factions, we've tried to focus on those that were in the 8th edition book, where possible, or that had models and rules and so on, to try and keep the list nice and small. Now, the vampire counts was born out of a joint faction that was the Undead back in the day, and split out, and Vampire Count has always been one that has drawn a lot of lore, a lot of books, and is also one of the most popular factions in all of Warhammer Fantasy Battle, and therefore there are a number of incredibly famous and well-known characters. So, we're going to look at quite a few of these and try and put a bit of a spin on who is possible or would be a good choice to be added into the game. Interestingly, given that there are so many characters, the vampire counts currently only have 4 legendary lords, and Helm Gorst wouldn't necessarily have been my first choice for those legendary lords. And, you know, so it is quite an interesting one. We've currently got Manfred, von Carstein, Vlad, Isabel, and Heinrich Kemmler, all who were in the 8th edition book. And so then you've got Helm Gorst, who was an interesting choice. So when we come down the list, possible lords, there are quite a few. So you've got Aborash. Aborash, bodyguard essentially or protector of Neferata in Lamia. He essentially is the most legendary of all the blood dragons, and essentially was and is their first master. However, he has an interesting one in that he strives for perfection but avoids drinking the blood of innocents, only of criminals and so on. And that's due to regret over what he did in Lamia. So Aborash is an interesting one, though not one that I would see in the game if we were to have, and I do think it would be cool to have kind of a lord of each of the bloodlines. You've already got the von Carsteins in there. But if you were going to have one of the bloodlines, I would have Warlock Harkon. Warlock Harkon, second only to Aborash in terms of fame. He was the one that actually created the Order of Blood Knights, the Blood Dragons. He is the Grand Master of the Order of the Blood Dragons. So I would definitely like to see him added as a Lord of the Blood Dragon vampire line. So I think he would be very, very cool to add into the game. Who else have we got on the list here? We've got Neferata. Well, I mean, it's not, she's former ruler of Lamia, infected with, and she was the one that essentially created the vampires in that way, having stolen Nagash's elixir. She is incredibly famous. Does Neferata sit within the vampire counts? If we go down to the bottom of the list, we've got Nagash here. I don't think Nagash should be in the vampire counts. He feels like he should be an undead faction all on his own. And if that's the case, it's an interesting one as who else would go in that faction. I mean, Neferata, she is a vampire. She is the overall ruler of the Lamian vampire bloodline. So in a way, she kind of fits within those vampire counts. She does have a model, though it's riding, obviously, a mount that appeared only in the end times. But she does have a really cool model, has rules. And so I could definitely see, and there's a lot of people that want Neferata in, right? And again, if you're thinking of bloodlines and you think Lamian, it's Neferata without question. So, definitely an opportunity there. The Red Duke, he's an interesting one. He's obviously already in the game, starting in Musalon. Is not somebody who I would see having a paid DLC for. A bit like Boris Todbringer, you've got this essentially legendary lord in the game who's already in the game that's not playable. And I think it's just madness. I just don't know why they just don't make Boris Todbringer Red Duke playable as a faction. You don't actually have to do much to add them in the game to make them playable. So he should be already a Lord, but he shouldn't be a paid DLC Lord. One Lord who I would love to see in the game and who I would have chosen instead of Helm and Gorst would have been Dieter Helsnicht. Dieter Helsnicht had a model. He gives you that necromancer element, known as the Doom Lord of Middenheim. He would add a really nice thing in there against Boris Todbringer. So he rides on the back of a big manticore. So Dieter Helsnicht, loved the model, loved his story. I think he would be a great character to add in, and would be something different from a vampire count and being a necromancer. Assuran, essentially, Assuran, he becomes the first Strigoi. Again, with some of these that go right back, Neferata kind of sticks out, but Assuran, would I put him in? Not necessarily. I think if I was going to add in something along those lines, I think that there's better choices for legendary lords to add in the game, but Assuran is definitely one there. Say as the first Strigoi, if you were going to have someone in for that line. Friedrich van Hal, again, the famous necromancer, particularly during the Skaven Wars, obviously coming from the Van Hel family. But again, I'd rather have Dieter Helsnicht if you're going down that route. If you're going into, again, you've got Zelig van Kruger. Now, Zelig van Kruger is an interesting one because he's already in the game. Obviously, he is the leader of the Tempelhof faction that you fight with if you're starting as Vlad. So he's technically in the game, just not playable. But again, if you're going to pick a legendary Lord Necromancer, Dieter Helsnicht fits that bill. If you're going down the Necrarch bloodline, then you've got Zacharias the Ever Living. I think he's a really interesting one. He actually studied under the tutelage of Dieter Helsnicht, and eventually found his way to Melchior the Ancient. So you've got Zacharias the Ever Living, who rides a zombie dragon. You've also got Melchior the Ancient. Both of those could be in. Again, if I was going to pick one, I'd probably go towards Zacharias than I would to Melchior. A bit like, you've got things like Abarash and Warlock Harkon and so on. So, I've got Melchior there, and Melchior did have a model. But I think I prefer to go with in terms of timeline as well, you're going with Warlock Harkon, you're going with Zacharias the Ever Living of those bloodlines. Neferata kind of just has always been there. So if you're going down that bloodline, that's where I would go with that one. You got Luther Harkon. Luther Harkon, obviously, he is an interesting one. That he is now part of the Vampire Coast, but his story does cross over with the Vampire Counts. So you've got Melchior was the first Vampire Necrarch, though he was created by Wasoran. So that's an interesting one there. But again, Wasoran I wouldn't put in there. Melchior I wouldn't necessarily put in there. I think you can only put so many lords in. Zacharias the Ever Living, Warlock Harkon, Dieter Helsnicht, Neferata. Those are the sort of the choices that I would have in here. Vorag Bloodytooth as the first Ghoul King, I think is an interesting one. Again, if you're going sort of down that route of Strigoi, I think that's a better choice than some of the other ones. I think Vorag Bloodytooth, and particularly given his location, his interactions he's had with orcs and goblins in particular, could be something interesting. Wasoran there, father of the Necrarch bloodline, essentially. But again, some of these like ultimate bloodline people I wouldn't actually have in. I'd prefer to have, like I say, Zacharias, who was created from those other sort of father type bloodline models. As I've said, in terms of Nagash, I think he doesn't fit inside a vampire cat. I think he's almost on his own. So yeah, there's lots to choose from. Just as we go down the list to summarise, Melchior, he had a model, but I wouldn't necessarily put him in. Neferata, I think, is going to be super popular. Loads of people want to see Neferata. She should be in. Dieter Helsnicht is clearly, for me, the best necromancer model that I would add into this. The Red Duke's already in the game. I don't think he should be paid DLC. Vorag Bloody Tooth, it would be nice to have a Strigoi element to it. Warlock Harkon, definitely. Such a cool character. Grandmaster of the Blood Knights would be really cool to have him in. Zacharias the Everliving as your Necrarch bloodline leader. So there you go. I think that's the possible lords. So many to choose from, and we've only scratched the surface in terms of the famous lords in the vampire counts. I put Luther Harkon in here. I know he's in Vampire Coast, but just to show you actually how many, if you go down the vampire counts list, how many appear in there. Current heroes, you currently have got Krell. Now, Krell is an 8th edition hero in the book. In the game, he's available to Heinrich Kemmler only, so I think either you've got the option that he appears in other armies and is a persistent hero, or you add in 2 other possible ones, those being Conrad von Karstein. He had rules and a model, and he would be quite interesting. The other one is Constant Drachenfels, which I think would also be... I mean, both of those would be good choices for legendary heroes, though nothing wrong with keeping Krell as a legendary hero if you open him up to all the other legendary lords. So... Vampire counts, lots to choose from. I think you've really got to filter down of what you're looking for. For me, it is having a legendary lord for those Lamian, Necrarch, Blood Dragon, Strigoi, Vampire Bloodlines, given we've already got the Von Karstein, and then potentially a really good Necromancer. Yes, that's a lot of legendary lords, but there's no limit. And it doesn't mean just because you've got 7 or 8 vampire counts that you have to have 7 or 8 for everybody else. We already see massive disparity between factions that have 1 or 2 lords compared to Skaven and Lizardmen with 6 and 7 and so on. So vampire counts, I think, have got so much more to offer than is currently in the game. I'm sure there will be tons of discussion on this one. I say the vampire counts are a popular faction. There are so many different characters and names, and if you don't agree with anything I've said or who I would put into the game, then please comment in down below and we can have a discussion about who and why you think a particular lord or hero should be added to the faction. And if you like the video, give it a thumbs up. If you didn't like it though, give it a thumbs down. Let me know why in the comments down below. And as always, if you want to see more of these videos, then please subscribe. It's free for you to do, but it means a huge amount for me, so thank you for that in advance. You've been watching The Ghost Owl, and I'll see you very soon.